Hey there, honey bunnies. Welcome to episode 34. I remember when we chose peace. I'm recording this a little bit early because I'm going to be traveling. I'm going to be on the road for a couple of days and using that time to further release into what's trying to happen in our world and doing my part to contribute to the transition, to the making accessible more peace for us to draw from. It's not easy to do that when the temptation to sink into the pain of all of it is ever present. So I'm going to be using just a little talking reverse engineering technique from Kyle Cease. And I'll leave a link to the YouTube video in the description. Or you can just go to YouTube and enter Kylego, K-Y-L-E-G-O. On the surface, it sounds like just a fun little thing to do. But in practice, it's a profound technique that you can do no matter where you are for anything. And recently, this shift is from asking for individual goals to asking for the world at large to awaken. So I'm just going to riff on that for a few minutes and leave this for you for an early delivery of this week's podcast. So the way Kylego works is you just pretend what you want to happen has already happened. So I remember when we had an immigration crisis on our borders. I remember when our government had gotten so corrupt that cruelty was an accepted method of deterrence, regardless of its ineffectiveness. I remember when the forces of indulging our basest impulses seemed to be taking over the world. I remember when it was so dark and we thought nothing would ever change. And the demon despair was barking at our door. And we didn't know what to do. And we were often swept away in the rivers of cries of children and mothers and fathers. Until we thought we would drown in the sound of all the pain. I remember when we had to catch ourselves and get aligned and remember that we are generators of peace, that we are physical containers for the divine, that we, through our physical bodies, can channel the divine beloved into the world simply by choosing to, simply by spending time in quiet and exploring the gap between what we perceive and what reaction or response we choose. Because in that gap is infinite power. And in that gap is our ability to say no, once again, to evil. In that gap, we can decide, I will not be swept away by the tears, by this river of pain roaring through our world. I will go upstream and contribute and add to the flow so that what comes downstream changes. I will go so far upriver to where the waters run pure, and I will radiate peace, and I will embody presence, and I will say to the divine, use me, Lord, make of me an instrument of thy peace, and I will mean it, and I will live it. And I remember when so many people did that, that changed the course of history. I remember when the scales fell from the eyes of our leaders and they stopped and they caught themselves being tools for wrongness, being the deliverers of pain and the abusers of children. I remember the miraculous moments when they woke up one by one by one, and they stopped. And reparations and amends were made. And there were no more cages. And there were no more for-profit prisons. There were no more allowances for people to make money from other people's misery. The purposeful infliction of agony on others stopped because so many of us chose to go so far upriver and say, I will be peace. I will be power. I will be so centered and grounded that I will contribute to the rising force of good. I will be one who tips the scales back into love, back into nurturing, back into mothering. I will be one who contributes to finding the balance again. And so many of us did that. So many of us chose to step above it all and claim the power to make a change. And it did. And our world got so beautiful once again. And we began to talk to each other again. And we began to say, how can I serve? How can I help? What do you need from me? My brothers and sisters. And I remember when so many more people approached life in that way, that there was no more room for war profiteers. There was no space available for liars and cheats and thieves of joy. We ended it, and I remember that. I remember how so many women said, I will no longer allow my boundaries to be violated. I will no longer serve until I am an empty husk with nothing to offer myself or anyone else. I remember when women said no. And yes, no more of this, and yes to that. Yes to claiming the power of our bodies to create. Yes to getting back in our bodies and creating. I remember when it was glorious. It was a glorious transition to the divine feminine that takes care of all the people. The dirty and the clean. The rotten and the wonderful. All the babies and all the elders. All the animals. All the things. I remember this. I remember when balance was restored and there was respect in every conversation and in every interaction because we cared for one another so much that love and respect became our highest value, and we stood united in our celebrated differences. That the love coming through our bodies restored our own personal health. And we made room for all the ways of healing. And we supported and funded the research required to create even more ways to prevent disease and ways to treat that which already exists. I remember when our children didn't go to schools anymore in buildings that looked like prisons for tiny people. I remember when they went into the woods, into the land, onto the prairies, and explored the air, the plants, the animals, the birds. When rather than being surrounded by concrete, they were surrounded by beauty. And they took a recess from their play to learn the facts and the figures and the linear things. And the majority of their day was spent in the sunlight. I remember when our world got so locked into what looked like a path of utter destruction, and we turned it around. I remember that we made room for miracles, and those miracles came. And they came with such a force that was gentle and powerful and changed everything. And we saved ourselves because we chose to. Because we said no to this and yes to that. We said no to cruelty and yes to love. And not the kind of love that enables victimhood, but the kind of love that says, I see that you see yourself as broken, and I choose to see you whole. I see that you see things as hopeless, and I choose to see us overcoming. I choose to see us triumphing. I remember when so many people said those things, and so many people did not fall into the pit, but instead stood on the edge, whole and radiant, and reached their hands down and said, join me in claiming the power. Join me in exercising what we have too long forgotten, that we made this world and we can remake it. I remember when the news became a source of celebration. And if there was a natural disaster, there was no more wailing and moaning and joining in the pain of it. Instead, many hands made light the burden of restoration. That we learned to experience the pain of life as it happens, and then we chose again and again and again to stand up, to choose to create what we desired with a benefit for all, as a strong mother does for all her children, loving all their differences and encouraging all their strengths, and leaving no room for excuses. I remember when we thought it was over. And what we didn't know is through our choosing, we created a world that is astonishing, a world that we don't remember having in many, many generations. We created a world that is so harmonious, that understands the balance between shadow and light, that understands we will always have evil impulses and greedy desires. but we don't hide them in closets so that they come creeping out at night to hurt. We don't hide them in closets. We say, hello, greed. We say, hello, selfishness. We say, hello, desire to hurt another. And we hold it in the space of our love as the wounded children that those things are. And we love them back into the light. And we loved our world back into the light. We did it ourselves. We chose to. We chose to go upriver, take our attention from the madness, and create a crystal, beautiful, glittering, shining flow. Think less, feel more. And I'll speak to you again next week.